Obviously, the Iranians have, shall we say, an interesting history when it comes to embassies. And for a lot of Americans, the storming of the Saudi Arabian embassy in Tehran is reminiscent of another embassy takeover 36 years ago. It was November 4th, 1979, when student militants, or what they called were student militants, took over the U.S. embassy in Iran's capital. In a hostage crisis that riveted our nation, 53 Americans were held captive under brutal conditions for 444 days. They were finally released just hours after President Ronald Reagan delivered his inauguration speech in 1981. Shortly before this past Christmas, just last month, those hostages finally won compensation for their time in captivity.
For more on the growing tensions between Saudi Arabia and Iran, as well as any impact it could have on U.S. relations in the Middle East, let's bring in Steve Pomerantz. He was the FBI's Assistant Director and Counterterrorism Chairman. Thank you so much for joining us, Steve.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
First and foremost, we've watched the fallout over the past 24 hours or so. Saudi Arabia executing the top Shiite cleric. Why now? Why? We know the tensions between them are really tough, right, but why make this move now?
Well, again, I think Leland said it a couple of times, and it's right. You have to look at this in the context of a long period of history, eons ago. But you have Saudi Arabia, the leader of the Sunni faction in the Middle East, versus Iran, the leader of the Shiites. And this is an ongoing struggle. And this has to be seen in the context of that ongoing struggle. It's ironic because you have both of them are extremist regimes. Both of them are major sponsors of terrorism, just a different brand of terrorism. I think right now we tend to look at the Saudis more as our allies, but it's much more complex than that, because out of Saudi Arabia comes the Wahhabi strain of Islam, which is one of the principal strains that fuel terrorism around the world. It just fuels the Sunni brand of terrorism, as opposed to what the Iranians do. So we are seeing a struggle for hegemony in that part of the world between the major Sunni and the major Shiite.
But officials had to know that it would incite violence across different parts of the globe.
Yes, again, I'm sure they did, and I'm sure they weighed the consequences carefully and decided that this move was in their best interest at this present time. Look, I think it's, in a sense, it's working for them, because to take over the embassy, or the violence at the embassy, at their embassy in Tehran, has only seemed to attract world sympathy. Again, it's a lot more complex than that, and needs to be seen in the overall context of the terrorism situation in the world today.
Certainly without hypothesizing, but taking more of a macro look, what is the U.S. role in all this? And yes, we have heard statements released by the administration, but is there any role that
I think the U.S. role, in its simplest terms, is to preserve our interest in that part of the world. That is certainly what the countries involved do. Saudi Arabia is probably the primary example of that. The Saudis tend to cooperate with us and do things that we see as positive only when it's in their best interest. A lot of the rest of the time, again, they are fueling the ideology of terrorism. That's always in the background, but on occasion they do things that we see as positive, when and only when it is in their best interest to do that. And I think we need to look at this situation in the exact same light. What is in the best interest of the United States to do at this point?
Okay, in the interest of time, I do want to get to one more topic, and we've talked about it, the spread of ISIS. And there has been a huge increase in arrests, but we've also seen a push, obviously, in social media. We saw a video released most recently that included one of the Republican contenders in the race, Donald Trump. What do you foresee in the future with ISIS? We see a crackdown, but as far as them using political figures, it's getting more and more personal by the day.
Right. You know, I can tie these two issues together in a way, because once again, in terms of the use of American political figures, and we have this great argument about whether that is propelling, that when negative things are said by candidates in the U.S., whether this fuels that phenomenon overseas. Maybe on the margins it does, possibly just yes, on the margins it does. But they have an ideology that at this moment is in ascendancy. And that's what's fueling their growth and their behavior. Right now they see themselves as on the ascent. It's inherent in their ideology as to what they do, much more than anything that any political candidate in the U.S. Says or does. Maybe on the margins that may affect some of their recruiting, but principally that comes out of their own popularity, out of the strength of their own message. And again, we have to counter that. Right now, we are aggressively doing that, and I think when you mention the arrests in this country, that's one of the manifestations of that. And we have to just continue to do that, to continue to fight until that tide turns, and someday it will.
And so difficult, there's no profile.
Very difficult.
Very difficult. Steve Pomerantz, thank you so much.
Thank you.